I heard it from the hallway in my childhood house with the lights off and my heart pounding like it was trying to warn me. My dad's voice came through the dark calm and certain, "Don't worry, we'll make your brother pay." He wasn't talking about my little brother. He was talking about me, about using my credit, my paycheck, my life to erase my brother's mess. I didn't scream. I didn't confront them. I walked back upstairs, packed in silence, and moved every dollar I could before sunrise. But what they didn't know was I'd already locked the one thing they needed most, my name. My name is Caspian. Most people call me Cap. And I'm sharing this because I know what it feels like to be treated like an ATM by the people who raised you. Before I tell you everything, can you drop hi in the comments or tell me where you're watching from? Sometimes knowing someone's there makes all the difference. And if you've ever carried a family burden that wasn't yours, please subscribe so you don't have to hear stories like this alone. I live in a one-bedroom condo in Jersey City, the kind with floor-to-ceiling windows that look straight across the Hudson at Manhattan. At night, the skyline glows like a promise I already kept to myself. I paid for this place with money I earned, tracked, protected, and never borrowed from anyone. My life runs on systems now. Every dollar has an assignment. Emergency fund, short-term liquidity, long-term investments, credit limits set lower than banks are willing to offer, two-factor authentication on everything, alerts that buzz my phone if even a dollar moves without my approval. This isn't paranoia, it's habit. When you grow up learning that stability can disappear the moment someone else decides you're responsible enough, you build structure the way other people build walls. I work in financial risk management, which feels less like a career choice and more like an extension of my nervous system. I assess exposure for a living, worst-case scenarios, points of failure, human behavior under pressure. People assume it's all numbers, but it's really about patterns. The same patterns repeat everywhere if you know how to look, especially inside families. On the surface, I'm calm, busy, controlled. That's what people see. Underneath, there's a constant low-grade tension that flares every time my phone lights up with a call from home. Because those calls are never just check-ins. They're never, "How are you holding up?" They orbit one thing, Dawson. What he needs, what he wants, what he's struggling with, and how somehow I might be part of the solution. The call comes on a Wednesday afternoon, right between meetings. My mother's voice is cheerful, rehearsed in that way I recognize instantly. She doesn't ask if I'm free. She launches straight into the reason. Her birthday is coming up. She's made a reservation at a nice restaurant in Indianapolis. Family will be there. It would mean a lot if I came home. She says it the way people say no pressure while applying pressure anyway. When I ask how she's doing, she answers by talking about the guest list. When I mention work has been heavy, she doesn't respond to that at all. Instead, she adds almost casually that Dawson will be home early too because they need to talk about his future. That phrase lands wrong. Talk about his future. In my family, conversations about the future are never theoretical. They're logistical. They happen when there's a problem that needs a person willing to absorb it. I tell myself I'm reading too much into it. It's just a birthday. 2 days. Dinner, cake, polite smiles, then back to New Jersey. I hang up and sit there longer than I need to, staring at my reflection in the dark screen of my laptop. I text Tessa, my closest friend in the city, the one person who knows how my family really works. I tell her I'm heading back to Indiana for the weekend. She responds almost immediately. "Keep your wallet closed and your mouth neutral. Your family never just wants to see you." I don't reply, but the message sticks with me. It always does. Before I shut down for the day, I notice a folder on my desktop I haven't opened in years. Mercer family, old scans, financial paperwork, random documents I once saved without fully understanding why. I leave it closed. Still before bed, I double-check my flight confirmation, then open my banking app one more time and re-enable alerts I already have turned on. I tell myself it's muscle memory from work. But as I lock the condo door behind me the next morning and roll my suitcase toward the elevator, a cold instinct settles in my chest. This time I wasn't invited home just to celebrate. This time I'm being called in. On the plane to Indiana, the engine noise becomes a kind of white space where memories surface whether I invite them or not. Carmel, Indiana. A quiet suburb with trimmed lawns and two-story houses that all look vaguely the same. From the outside, my family fit perfectly there. Inside, the rules were different. I learned them early. I was the oldest, which meant I was expected to know better before I knew anything at all. Straight A's weren't celebrated. They were assumed. When I brought home an A-, my dad asked why it wasn't an A. When I placed second in the science fair, my mom wondered out loud what I could have done differently to win. Dawson, 5 years younger, didn't live under that microscope. He did fine, and fine was enough. Sometimes more than enough. The difference showed up everywhere. My bedroom was simple. White walls, hand-me-down furniture. If something worked, that was the end of the discussion. Dawson's room looked like a catalog spread, a race car bed. Bright decals. New toys appeared without explanation. When I questioned it, my parents smiled like I was missing something obvious. He's younger. He needs encouragement. Boys are different. Somehow that meant I needed less. By the time I was 10, chores were mine by default. Dishes, laundry, keeping things tidy. At 12, babysitting was added unpaid and unquestioned. When I pushed back, my mother said it like a compliment. "You're so mature." What she meant was reliable. Christmas when I was 14 is the moment that finally named things for me. I'd asked for a laptop for school, researched affordable options, explained how it would help. I unwrapped a second-hand machine that barely held a charge. 2 hours later, Dawson tore into the box of a brand new gaming setup that cost several times more. My dad explained it calmly. Games help with coordination, problem solving. He said it like it was an investment. I didn't ask about my education. I already knew the answer. I got my first job at 16 weekends at a grocery store. I needed my own money. Dawson didn't. He received allowances without conditions. When I worked 20 hours a week to cover basics, my dad said it built character. When Dawson needed something, it was provided. High school only widened the gap. I paid for my own class trip to Washington, D.C. 6 months later, my parents funded a computer camp for Dawson that cost twice as much. They called it planning for his future. Mine apparently was already handled. By me. One memory resurfaces as the plane begins its descent, one I've tried not to examine too closely. I was 18. A bank envelope arrived at the house addressed to me. Inside was information for a store credit card I had never applied for. When I asked my mother, she brushed it off. Just a secondary card. For household stuff. Already canceled. I wanted peace more than answers back then, so I let it go. But sitting there now, older, sharper, with a credit profile built carefully over a decade, that memory changes shape. It doesn't feel harmless anymore. It feels like a test run. I tell myself that if they were willing to try something small when I was young and inexperienced, they would absolutely try something bigger now. Especially now. Especially with my income and credit. I make a quiet decision as the wheels touch down. I'll check my credit report when I land. I won't mention it to anyone. I step off the plane carrying gifts and a practiced smile, but underneath there's a sentence looping through my mind with uncomfortable clarity. My family never asks for money. They create reasons that make it seem like I'm offering it myself. By the time the car merged onto the highway from the airport, my mind had already drifted backward, pulled by the same invisible thread that always tightened when I came back to Indiana. Bloomington came first. College hadn't been freedom the way people like to romanticize it. It had been strategy. I still remembered the July evening before my freshman year when my parents called me into the dining room, papers spread across the table like a budget meeting instead of a family conversation. I had earned a partial scholarship enough to make them nod and say they were proud, but not enough to make college affordable without help. That was when my father cleared his throat and said they had reviewed their finances. They couldn't contribute. They needed to start setting money aside for Dawson's education. Computer programs were expensive. Futures required planning. Dawson was still years away from college, but his future already mattered more than my present. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I shifted into a mode I would later recognize as survival accounting. I asked what forms I needed, what deadlines mattered, which loans carried the lowest interest. That night alone in my room, I built my first real spreadsheet. Tuition, housing, books, hours I would need to work, debt I could tolerate without drowning. It wasn't bravery. It was necessity. Bloomington became a blur of early mornings and late nights. I worked shifts at the campus library and a coffee shop off Kirkwood, studied until my eyes burned, slept in blocks of 4 or 5 hours. My roommate Noah watched me run myself into the ground and shook his head more than once. He told me I couldn't live like that for 4 years. I told him I didn't have a choice. I got sick my first winter, the kind of exhaustion that settles into your bones. I still went to class. I still turned everything in on time. I never once asked my parents for money. When they called, they talked about Dawson, his classes, his interests, the new laptop he needed. I listened while staring at my own battered machine, its casing cracked, the battery barely holding. College taught me many things, but the most important was this: no one was coming to save me, and I had already learned how to save myself. That lesson followed me to New York the summer I landed an internship at a financial firm. It was the first place I'd ever been where outcomes mattered more than family dynamics. Numbers didn't care who was favored. Models didn't bend because someone was still figuring things out. I worked harder than anyone in my intern cohort because hard work was the one currency I trusted. When my mentor told me I had a full-time offer waiting if I wanted it, I felt something close to relief. Not joy. Relief. A path. Over time, I paid off my loans, built savings, and bought my condo with money that had passed through my hands only after I had earned it. I came home less and less after that. Every visit felt like a performance review where my success was acknowledged briefly before being reframed as a resource. Dawson needed this. Dawson wanted that. Dawson. Investment. Opportunity. Support. Standing in my parents' driveway now, looking at the house where my old bedroom had been converted into a generic guest space, I felt that familiar tightening again. Inside, the air smelled the same. Clean. Familiar. My mother hugged me quickly, already talking about dinner plans. My father nodded, distant but polite. Dawson lounged in the kitchen, scrolling his phone, grinning when he saw me. Before dinner, I found myself alone with my grandmother in the living room. It was one of those moments that felt incidental, unplanned. She asked about my work. I answered carefully. Then she tilted her head and said something that stopped me cold. She mentioned casually that my parents had been telling relatives I was getting involved in a family business idea, that I'd be handling the financial side since I knew what I was doing and had the means. The words hung there between us. I smiled, said nothing, and excused myself. But inside, something clicked into place. This hadn't started this weekend. They had been laying groundwork, telling a story where my participation was already assumed. That night, lying in the guest room, staring at a ceiling that used to belong to me, I understood the invitation clearly. I wasn't here to reconnect. I was here to be cast. The afternoon before my mother's birthday dinner unfolded with the quiet efficiency of a rehearsal. Every comment had a purpose, every suggestion carried an edge. My mother reminded me twice about the reservation, about how many people would be there, about how important it was that everything feel harmonious. She didn't ask if I was tired from travel. She asked if I was ready. Dawson drifted in and out of rooms, calling me big city and finance guy, asking about my condo, my job, whether I was still investing aggressively. His tone was light teasing, but his eyes stayed on my face longer than necessary, like he was measuring something. At the restaurant in Indianapolis, the atmosphere was polished and loud, the kind of place where conversation floats over clinking glasses and expensive plates. Halfway through the meal, my father shifted the discussion. He talked about how families should build things together, about opportunities that come from pooling resources. He spoke in language I knew well. Cash flow. Long-term returns. Risk tolerance. My mother followed, softening it with sentiment, talking about connection, about legacy. Then she looked at me and said I was good at this sort of thing, that I could help guide everyone. Heads turned. Smiles waited. I hadn't agreed to anything yet. The narrative had already moved past consent. I kept my voice even and said if there was something concrete they could send it to me to review later. My father didn't look surprised. If anything, he looked prepared. Toward the end of the meal, my uncle laughed and asked if we were really starting a family company. I felt the floor drop under that question. I hadn't told anyone. which meant the story had traveled without me. Back at the house, as people dispersed and the evening wound down, I passed my father's home office. Papers sat neatly stacked on his desk. I didn't touch them. I didn't need to. The letterhead at the top of the page belonged to a local bank. Words like application and estimate stood out clearly. This wasn't an idea forming over dessert. It was a plan waiting for a signature. I went to bed with a new rule set firmly in place. I would not sign anything. I would not share numbers. I would not commit verbally to anything. As the house went quiet, I lay awake listening to familiar sounds, understanding fully that I was no longer a guest. I was a solution they intended to use. Morning in my parents' house always had a particular rhythm, one I remembered too well. Cabinets opening, the coffee maker sputtering, my mother moving with purpose as if the day itself depended on her staying busy. I came into the kitchen to find her already dressed, hair done, the television on low with the morning news playing behind her. She smiled when she saw me, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. She started talking immediately, not about breakfast, not about how I slept, but about how tired she felt lately. She mentioned her age, her blood pressure, how she just wanted some peace after all these years. Then she said it softly, almost tenderly, as if it were a truth so obvious it didn't need defending. She said I had done well because the family had raised me right, because they had sacrificed, because nothing I had was mine alone. I didn't argue. I made coffee and listened. Inside, I noted the shift. This wasn't nostalgia. It was leverage. She was rewriting the past into a debt I supposedly owed. My father joined us a few minutes later and moved the conversation in a different direction. He asked how work was going then, as if it were a casual thought asked where my credit score usually sat these days. He asked if I still had student loans, if the condo payment was manageable, if banks treated me well. I kept my answers vague, careful. I said work was fine. I said my finances were private. I watched his expression closely. He nodded, but there was a flicker of calculation there, like someone adjusting numbers that no longer matched expectations. Dawson wandered in mid-conversation, shirtless, phone in hand, already smirking. He joked that I was always so serious that I should loosen up. Then he said, laughing, that I could help him out just once and he'd pay me back. I asked him how much help he needed. He shrugged and waved it off, said we'd talk later. That told me everything. People with clean numbers don't avoid saying them. People drowning do. I suggested stepping out for some air and asked my grandmother if she wanted coffee. She agreed quickly, grateful for the excuse. We walked a few blocks to a small cafe I remembered from childhood. Over paper cups, I told her carefully that my parents were talking about a family plan and that it made me uneasy. She looked at me for a long moment before speaking. Then she said my mother had been calling relatives for weeks, telling them I'd help straighten things out for Dawson because I was stable and capable, that I'd always been the dependable one. The story had been circulating without my consent, shaping expectations before I even arrived. When we parted, I felt heavier than before, like the walls were closing in. Back at the house, the pressure sharpened. In the afternoon, my mother handed me her phone and said someone from the bank had a quick question for me. She framed it as helpful, efficient. I handed the phone back untouched and told her any financial conversations would go through me directly. Her face tightened for just a second before she recovered. A few minutes later, Dawson went upstairs to shower. His phone buzzed on the counter. I didn't touch it, but the screen lit up long enough for me to see the words overdue payment and an app I recognized immediately. Gambling, not a slip, a pattern. Later, I heard my parents talking in the kitchen, voices low but urgent. My mother told my father not to mention the full amount in front of me. He replied that timing mattered, that urgency had to be calibrated. I stood frozen in the hallway, the casual cruelty of that calculation settling into my bones. When I passed my father's desk again, I noticed a new sheet added to the stack. A checklist, identification, proof of income, signature, co-borrower. My name didn't have to be written there for me to know who it was for. As evening fell, Dawson snapped at me over nothing, then muttered that if I didn't help, he was finished. I asked him who was after him. He stopped, glanced toward my father, and shrugged it off. That was the moment something clicked. This wasn't just internal panic. There was pressure coming from somewhere else. That night I told them I was exhausted and went to bed early. I turned off the light, lay still, and waited. I wasn't leaving yet. I needed to hear what they said when they thought I couldn't. The house settled into silence slowly. I stayed awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, listening to footsteps, doors closing, the low murmur of voices drifting through vents and walls. My phone rested in my hand screen, dark but alive. A notification buzzed softly just after 10, an alert from a monitoring service I used informing me of unusual activity. A check, an attempt. I didn't jump to conclusions, but the timing made my pulse spike. I checked again and saw another message, this one about a request to update account information that I hadn't initiated. Someone was testing doors. I moved quietly into the hallway past my parents' room toward my father's office. On his desk, illuminated by the faint glow from a nearby lamp, lay a printed page with my name typed neatly at the top. Applicant. Guarantor. It didn't matter which. Seeing it, there was enough. They had already placed me into the structure of their plan. I backed away as my mother's voice floated from the kitchen. She told my father they needed to reassure Dawson, that he'd been on edge all day. My father answered calmly that I would handle it, that I always did. I noted the time. I noted the words. I didn't confront them. I understood that reacting now would only make them more careful. Near midnight, the front door opened quietly. Dawson slipped inside, tension radiating from him. I stood in the darkened hallway, heart hammering, listening as he told my father the numbers. The amounts were higher than I expected. My father asked questions, his voice shifting from concern to calculation with unsettling ease. Then he said it, clear, certain. He told Dawson not to worry. He said they would make his brother pay. Something inside me went very still. All the doubt evaporated. This wasn't misunderstanding or miscommunication. This was intent. I stepped back, moved silently to my room, and closed the door. I didn't think about birthdays or family or fairness anymore. I thought in tasks: leave, secure funds, lock credit, call professionals, protect myself. I stood there in the dark, phone clenched tight, knowing that when morning came, I would no longer be a son in that house. I would be something else entirely. Someone who had finally chosen himself. I closed my bedroom door without turning on the light and sat on the edge of the bed, letting the darkness steady me. My hands were calm, even though my chest wasn't. I had spent my life learning how to pause long enough to see the shape of danger before it moved. Staying until morning meant giving them time. Time to talk me into a signature, to slide a document across the table, to frame urgency as love. I set one rule and repeated it silently until it felt solid. No confrontation in this house. Action first. Words later. I packed only what mattered. Clothes folded fast and flat. Toiletries dropped into a bag. Chargers, passport, wallet keys. I left my mother's birthday gift on the dresser, exactly where she would find it. I wrote a short note on a scrap of paper, nothing dramatic, just enough to buy hours. Work emergency. Had to return early. Love you. No explanations to argue with. I waited until the house sank into its deepest quiet, listening for the patterns I knew by heart. A door closing. Dawson's footsteps. My father's distant breathing. I took the stairs, slowly avoided the one step that creaked, and slipped out the front door, easing it shut behind me. The rental car was still warm from the afternoon sun. I pulled out of the driveway and didn't look back. At the hotel near the airport, the lobby smelled like detergent and coffee. Anonymous. Safe. As soon as the door closed behind me, my phone buzzed again. Another alert. Another attempt. I didn't need proof anymore. I opened my laptop and went to work. First, I moved the money. Not all of it, not in a way that would trigger immediate alarms. I transferred the bulk of my liquid funds to an account at a bank my family didn't know existed, leaving just enough behind to look normal. Then I called my credit card issuer, spoke calmly, and reported a risk of unauthorized activity. I asked for new cards sent to my Jersey City address and disabled the ones currently active. The representative asked if anyone had contacted them on my behalf or requested loan information. The question landed hard. I answered no and took notes. Next, I locked my credit. I set the protections, chose a phrase no one in my family could guess, and confirmed that no new accounts could be opened without my direct involvement. I changed my email passwords first, knowing everything else depended on that. I enabled app-based verification everywhere and removed old recovery numbers I had never thought to question before. One security question stopped me cold. The answer referenced a street from my childhood. I replaced it immediately, feeling a wave of anger at my own past carelessness. I emailed my financial advisor Priya Shah with a clear subject line and a brief explanation. I requested a call at the earliest possible time. I sent a second message to Elise Ward, a lawyer recommended by a colleague, outlining the risk of identity misuse and asking for guidance. Only then did I change my flight, paying the fee without hesitation. I slept for maybe an hour, the rest of the night spent watching the door and refreshing notifications. By dawn, I was at the airport. By mid-morning, I was back in Jersey City, unlocking the door to my condo. I checked the mailbox, my email, recent logins. I opened the windows and let the air move through the space, a small ritual that felt necessary. My phone started lighting up. Missed calls. Messages. My mother asking where I was. My father calling again and again. A message from Dawson that made my stomach tighten. He said my father expected me to handle this. I opened my laptop and created a new folder named for the date. I began documenting everything: times, words, alerts. When I finished, I leaned back and made a decision. I would speak once on my terms, and then I would be done. I spent the morning building a perimeter. Priya called first. She walked me through additional safeguards, verbal passwords, transaction alerts, removing my parents as emergency contacts. She confirmed there were no open loans in my name and told me plainly that family members were the most common source of financial harm because they knew the answers to questions strangers couldn't. Elise followed with a plan. Document everything. Save every message. If necessary, send formal notice. Be prepared to report any unauthorized action immediately. I felt steadier with each step, less like I was reacting and more like I was reclaiming ground. I muted notifications and didn't listen to any messages. I needed clarity, not noise. That evening I sent a single text. 8 o'clock. Video call. Dawson present. One conversation. I sat in my home office when the call connected, the skyline glowing behind me. My mother spoke first, upset about embarrassment about guests. I stopped her gently and told them I had heard everything. I repeated my father's words exactly. The room on the screen went quiet. My father tried to minimize it, said nothing had happened yet. Dawson accused me of listening where I shouldn't. My mother cried and said family helped each other. I didn't argue. I told them what my life had looked like from 16 on. 2 jobs, loans, 5 hours of sleep, no help. I told them about paying off debt, about buying my home, about how none of that came from family money. I said I didn't owe a return on an investment they never made. Then I set the boundary. No money, no signatures, no shared accounts. Any attempt to use my name would have consequences. I told them my credit was locked and that I was working with professionals. I said if they told lies about me, I would tell the truth. Dawson snapped and said he only needed me to put my name down for a while. I thanked him for confirming the reality of the situation and ended the call. The fallout came fast. Calls from relatives, messages about obligation. I didn't debate. I sent a single email to the few people who mattered, outlining the history and the plan I had refused. I asked for respect, not allegiance. Some responded with understanding. That was enough. Months later, I moved west for work, joined a support group, learned what life felt like without constant vigilance. I heard through others that Dawson's situation collapsed, that my parents paid for it with their future. I felt no triumph, only relief. Years after that, Dawson wrote to me. He took responsibility. He didn't ask for money. I told him I needed time. I didn't lose my family overnight. I stopped pretending I had one that protected me. I saved myself with structure, with boundaries, and with the courage to leave the role they assigned me. That was the real inheritance. Have you ever had a moment when your entire understanding of family loyalty and love was turned inside out in the space of a few overheard words? I wonder how many people reading or listening right now have walked that same tightrope balancing gratitude and bitterness, belonging and betrayal, love and survival. And because as much as I wish my experience was a rare outlier, I know deep down it isn't. There are so many of us carrying the weight of expectations that were never meant to be shared, playing roles written for us by those who should have protected us the most. Now that you know my story, every meticulous detail, every sleepless night spent safeguarding my future from the people who raised me, I can't help but turn the question outward. What would you have done? Have you ever faced a crossroads where doing what's right for yourself meant disappointing, even abandoning the people who taught you what right was supposed to look like? It's a question that haunted me for years. The answer didn't come in a single lightning bolt of clarity. It came slowly through layers of self-doubt, guilt, and anger, then finally a kind of exhausted acceptance. It's easy to talk about boundaries and self-respect in the abstract. But nobody ever explains how much it aches to enforce those boundaries against the voices you spent your entire childhood wanting to please. No one tells you how strange it feels to sit in your own apartment, your own home bought and paid for by your own sweat, and realize that the people you most want to call and celebrate with are the ones you had to walk away from just to get here. There's a special kind of pain in watching your own milestones pass uncelebrated by those whose approval you used to crave. It's lonely. It's infuriating. Sometimes it's almost funny in a bleak way how the same people who questioned every achievement, minimized every success, suddenly expect you to save them from their own recklessness, as if your hard-won security was always meant to be theirs. Have you ever felt that like your worth was conditional, transactional, tied to what you could do for others rather than who you are? And then there's the shame. The shame of even feeling angry, of wishing things were different, of replaying every moment looking for the place where maybe, just maybe, if you had been better, more obedient, more loving, less difficult, things could have turned out another way. But here's the truth. I hope you'll take from my story. You are not responsible for the stories other people write about you, not even if those people are your family. You are not obligated to pay for debts you didn't incur financially, emotionally, or otherwise. I want to really ask you to reflect. Have you been the dependable one, the fixer, the responsible child, the backup plan? Have you watched siblings or relatives stumble and been expected to cushion their fall again and again, even when nobody was there to catch you? Maybe you've been the one who never asked for help, who built walls around yourself so high that nobody could see the loneliness inside. Or maybe you're still waiting for anyone to finally recognize how hard you've been working just to stay afloat. What do you do with all those unspoken hurts? The times you swallowed your needs because someone else's needs were always louder, always more urgent. The holidays spent watching others open the gifts you'd only dreamed of. The pride you felt in your own accomplishments dimmed by the quick, distracted nods of those too busy tending to someone else's latest crisis. How do you process the years of being told in words or in silence that your value comes from service and sacrifice, not from simply existing? I want you to know that whatever pain or resentment you carry, it's valid. I want you to know that there is no single right way to draw a line, to walk away, to redefine what family means to you. Maybe your story isn't as dramatic as mine. Maybe the betrayals were smaller, the wounds quieter, but just as deep. Or maybe you're still in the thick of it, searching for a way out that doesn't require burning your entire world down. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever stood at the edge of your own breaking point and wondered if you had the right to choose yourself, please know that you do. And if you're comfortable, I'd truly love to hear your story, your reflections, your pain, your resilience. Leave a comment. Share a memory, a moment, a lesson learned the hard way. Let's build a space where honesty is met with empathy, where survival isn't just possible but celebrated. And if you feel alone, please look again. There are more of us than you think, those who have rebuilt ourselves from the pieces our families left behind, who have learned that sometimes protecting yourself is the greatest act of love you'll ever commit. If my story gave you even a sliver of validation, if it made you feel seen, let me know. Drop a message even if it's just a word or a wave, because sometimes the smallest acknowledgement is enough to remind us we're not invisible. Finally, if you think someone else in your life needs to hear this, share it. Subscribe if you want more stories that peel back the layers on what it really means to heal, to stand up, and to claim your own narrative. I'm grateful for your time, your attention, and your willingness to feel with me. Thank you for listening and for being the kind of person who chooses honesty even when it hurts.